There is a kind of punishment that requires no accusation, no tears, and no retaliation. It comes when you no longer reply, no longer explain, no longer try to hold on or fix anything. And the strange thing is, it's that very silence that keeps them up at night. Not because you hate them, but because you're no longer there to soothe their guilt. It is a sentence their own conscience must carry out. We often believe that to be heard, we must speak, that to be respected, we must react. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. True power lies in self-restraint, in choosing not to be pulled into someone else's emotional game. When you stop reacting, you don't become weak, you become free. No longer a puppet of your feelings, you become the gatekeeper of your own peace. And when you choose silence, it's not because you have nothing to say. It's because you've realized you no longer need to say anything. That's when the game changes. Now, we'll walk together through 10 insights that reveal why silence becomes the sentence the betrayer cannot escape. 1. They expected a storm. You left only silence. Something strange happens when you don't react the way they expect. When someone presses on your wounds, they're not just trying to hurt you, they're testing your response. They wait to see if you'll scream, break down, or even beg. Not because they care how much it hurts, but because they want to confirm one thing, that they still control the narrative. In psychology, it's called emotional bait. A betrayal, a cutting remark, a silent withdrawal, all are hooks cast out, waiting to see if you'll bite with anger, resistance, or emotional outburst. And when you don't respond, don't cry in front of them, don't send a single message filled with pain, you don't satisfy them. You unsettle them. People aren't afraid of what they can see. They fear what they can't read. Anger is clear. Confrontation is predictable. But silence is a dark space they can't illuminate with their own logic. And that void confuses them. You withdraw not because you're weak, but because you see clearly. No words hold value in a game that is no longer fair. The choice not to react is how you refuse to step into the mud they've prepared. They want you to explode so they can call you unstable. They want you to plead so they can play the victim. But when you choose not to speak, not to chase, not to offer your emotions as public entertainment, you're not just preserving your dignity. You're stripping away the last tool they had to control you, your attention. Stoicism doesn't teach suppression. It teaches self-mastery. It's not that you don't feel you do, but you don't react. Because you understand emotion is a wave, and if you ride it instead of getting swept away, you remain in control. Those who live on drama, on reaction, on pushing others to the edge, they always hope for a storm. Because in the chaos, they get to cast blame, to twist confusion into proof that you are the problem. But when the storm never comes, when there's only silence, calm, and withdrawal, they're left to face the one thing they fear most, themselves. I once witnessed an old friend, after our breakup, send dozens of provocative messages just to get a reaction. When I didn't respond, just blocked her and quietly left, she began messaging people around me, spinning stories to justify why I was heartless. But the more she spoke, the clearer my silence became. I no longer belonged to that game. I no longer needed to be understood by someone who never cared to understand me in the first place. And when no one is left to react, all that remains is the echo of their own emptiness. They expected a storm. You left only silence. And in that silence, what echoes isn't your voice, it's their conscience knocking, for the first time in a long time, through the noise of denial. You don't have to scream. Your silence is the bell they can't unhear. 2. Silence disarms the manipulator's mind. A manipulator doesn't fear losing you. They fear losing the role they get to play when they're with you. And what terrifies them most isn't your departure, it's your exit without leaving a script for them to keep acting out. When you say nothing, don't cry, don't offer closure, don't defend or explain, they're left in a space they cannot control. Manipulators live by signals. They study reactions, read body language, dissect every word you type to find your weakness. They need you to say something so they can twist it, reframe the story, and assign you a new role. The overly sensitive one, the toxic one, or the weak one who can't let go. But when there are no words to manipulate, no actions to reinterpret, all their tools become useless, and that's when they start to lose control. To the manipulator, silence is not retreat. It is a dead zone where no signals are sent, no reactions arise, no expressions can be exploited. To them, it's a psychological lockdown. They spiral inside their own mind, inventing scenarios, talking to themselves, until slowly they become the victim of the very game they once played on others. I once saw a man, after a breakup, continue to text his ex, weekly checking in, pretending to care, sometimes with subtle jabs. She never replied. Not one word. Not a single question mark. 6 months later, he began writing long posts on Facebook recounting memories, hinting, blaming, half joking. It wasn't storytelling, it was the breakdown of an ego no longer received. He couldn't bear not knowing what she was thinking, and that loss of access drove him mad. Manipulators don't fear the truth. They fear truth that can't be twisted, and silence, if you're strong enough to hold it not from bitterness, but from clarity, becomes the mirror that reflects them as they truly are. They won't see you in that mirror. They'll see themselves, small, insecure, anxious, and most of all, with no one left to blame. Stoic philosophy teaches us power doesn't lie in controlling others, but in controlling ourselves. When you go silent, you're refusing to give away your most valuable power, emotional energy. You're saying with your action, I'm not playing this game anymore, I'm not a piece on your board, and you are no longer the one pulling the strings. And to someone who thrives on manipulation, there's nothing more terrifying than a person they can't read, can't provoke, can't drag back into the same old cycle. You go silent, they spiral. Not because you're cruel, but because they're too used to you being the peacekeeper, the first to apologize, the one who fixes everything. When you stop doing that, they don't just lose you. They lose the mirror that once reflected their favorite version of themselves, and now they're forced to face what's real. And in that silence, you don't need to say a word. They'll say everything in their own mind, on repeat without end. 3. You don't need to win to find justice. We grow up in a world where right and wrong are often decided by the loudest voice, by whoever proves their pain better or reacts the hardest. In conflict, we assume the last one speaking holds the power, that justice belongs to the one who can flip the script, expose the wrongdoing, and reclaim their name. But the truth doesn't operate that way. Not every victory is justice, and not every justice is cheered. Some wins need no audience. Some justice is only felt in the calm that follows your quiet departure. A man in the media industry once told me his story. He was a creative director at a prestigious company, spending nearly a decade building its image, vision, and network. But when the company began to flourish, a close colleague quietly conspired with new leadership to edge him out. No warning, no formal meeting, just one short email saying his role had been restructured. Everyone expected him to fight back, to sue, to go public, to expose the betrayal. But he did nothing. He left that same day, shut down his social media, disappeared. 6 months later, the brand began to fade, losing its loyal audience because the one thing they couldn't replicate was his vision. And during that time, he built a small agency aligned with his own philosophy, hand-picked team, no drama, no noise. A year later, he called the firing a blessing. I asked him, "Didn't you feel the need to get justice?" He smiled and said, "I didn't need to win. I just needed not to lose myself." That answer reminded me of a quote from Marcus Aurelius. "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." The best revenge is not striking back. It's refusing to become a mirror of the one who hurt you. Because when you fight to retaliate, you're placing your life's direction in the hands of the one who tried to wreck it. But when you walk away, keep your dignity, and redefine your path without them, you declare something no words can ever express. You no longer have any power over me. Justice isn't triumph in the fight, it's peace when you no longer need the fight. Not everyone will understand that because most of us are conditioned to believe, if you don't react, you're weak. If you don't expose them, you've lost. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. What lies outside your control is unworthy of governing your soul. You don't need to win in their eyes. You only need not to lose in your own. And sometimes that begins with a quiet step forward, no justification, no turning back. 4. Your absence becomes the verdict in their conscience. Not everyone recognizes your worth while you're still present. Many only learn the lesson when you're no longer there to teach it. No more caring glances, no more gentle questions, no more of you backing down just to preserve the relationship, and no one left to blame when their life starts falling apart. When you leave not with a shout, but with absolute silence, they'll finally hear what they once tried to ignore. Your presence was never accidental. A woman once told me she didn't realize how much she mattered until she disappeared from someone's life. She didn't lash out, didn't post her story online, didn't write a dramatic farewell letter. She simply deleted the number, left the group chat, and removed her name from every familiar link. A month later, the very people who once dismissed her began, accidentally, bringing her up in conversations. 2 months later, they started messaging her not out of care, but confusion. Her silence left them unsure of where they stood. They didn't know if she was angry, hurt, disappointed, or simply indifferent, and that uncertainty made them uneasy. Those who are used to control don't fear confrontation. They fear being left without warning. They fear that you've forgotten them in silence, that you've moved on without needing any explanations. They need you to stay, not to fix things, but to keep feeling like they hold the reins. And when you disappear completely, the void you leave isn't just an absence. It is a silent verdict, an encounter they can no longer avoid. In a world overflowing with sound and image, silence becomes the loudest echo. People can hide their guilt behind words, behind fake smiles, behind cheerful photos online. But when there's no one left to tell the story with, when there's no one to prove themselves right to, they're forced to look inward. And inside, there is often nothing but an unspoken regret. Stoics never demand validation from those who hurt them. They seek no apology, no explanation. All they require is to remain composed and walk away from what no longer deserves their energy. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone behaves wrongly, let them fix it through their own consequences." And your absence, that is the consequence no words can soften. You don't need to be present for others to realize your value. You only need to leave at the right time and stay silent long enough for your absence to begin teaching the lesson your words once tried to deliver in vain. don't think you're invisible just because they no longer mention your name. They feel you now more than ever, in the very moments they pretend you never existed. 5. Every time you don't react, you grow stronger. Strength doesn't always appear as a sharp glare, a cutting remark, or a bold action. In truth, sometimes strength looks like doing nothing. Not replying to the suggestive message, not responding to the sarcastic jab, not defending the ego that's being pulled out of its comfort zone. That lack of response doesn't mean you're weak, it means you've grown beyond the point where you still reach for the weapons of the weak. A man I once spoke with at a psychology seminar told me that after his divorce, his ex-wife kept provoking him with twisted stories, spreading rumors that turned their friends against him. At first, he reacted. He explained, fought back, tried to clear his name. But the more he tried, the more drained he became. One day he chose silence. No more explanations, no more clarifications, no more efforts to preserve how others viewed him. And then something strange happened. In that silence, not only did his mind begin to heal, but her words started to lose their power because no one was echoing them anymore. When you don't react, you interrupt a reflex loop, and that creates a new space. A quiet space where you can observe instead of being swept away. That space isn't weakness. It's time for you to hear yourself. It's proof that you no longer act on impulse, but on principle. And each time you do this, you move not just further from the situation, but closer to the person you want to become. Epictetus once said, "It's not the person who insults you that is the problem, it's how you choose to respond to the insult." Those who are easily provoked, easily dragged into emotional tides they have not yet mastered themselves. But you are different. Each time you choose not to speak when you could, not to engage when you're right, not to argue when you're fully capable, it's another layer of inner peace you build. And that peace no one can take unless you give it away. Others may say whatever they want about you. They may twist the story to their favor, label you with ignorant names, or project distorted versions of you into the minds of others. But if you don't react, if you keep living with integrity quietly, steadily, consistently, then your calm will cause their words to wither over time. Truth doesn't need to be shouted. It needs to be lived. And you're living it. Each day without retaliation, each night without justification, each forward step without the need to prove anything. That's not surrender. That's a victory without a stage. A quiet victory, but an undeniable one. You don't need others to recognize your strength. You just need to not lose it. And that begins the moment you choose not to react. 6. Let go of the explainer role. Reclaim your mental freedom. There comes a time in life when exhaustion doesn't come from work, or even from heartbreak, but from the constant need to explain. Explaining why you've changed. Explaining why you're silent. Explaining why you no longer want to join the same repetitive, meaningless conversations. Somewhere along the line, you became the professional explainer, the one expected to justify your actions, account for others' feelings, and clear up misunderstandings you didn't even cause. The truth is, you owe no one a report for your peace. Those who constantly demand explanations aren't seeking truth. They're seeking opportunities to argue, to control, to pull you back into a cycle where they ask and you must answer. But when you step out of the explainer role, you realize something powerful. You don't need others to understand you correctly in order to live authentically. Stoic philosophy always emphasizes this. The only thing you own is your mind and your actions. Not how others see you, not the stories they tell about you, not the narratives they shape to suit their emotions. Epictetus once said, "If you seek approval from the crowd, you've handed them the power to define your worth." And the moment you keep explaining yourself to those unwilling to understand, you've placed your freedom in their hands. I once knew a brilliant, kind woman who constantly felt misunderstood. Whenever someone accused her of being cold, she wrote long messages to clarify. When someone said she was arrogant, she overcompensated by acting overly humble. Bit by bit, her personality was chipped away, eroded by the effort to please people who never really tried to see her. Until one day she grew tired, and for the first time, she didn't reply to the accusations. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally understood. If someone sees you through a shattered lens, no matter how clear you are, their vision will still be distorted. Someone who once loved you, if they no longer want to understand, will twist even your kindness. A former friend, if they've decided to walk away, will remember you wrongly, just to make letting go easier. And you cannot change that with logic, or messages, or goodwill. What you can do is withdraw in silence. Not out of bitterness, but because you've realized spiritual freedom is not about being vindicated, it's about no longer needing to be. Letting go of the explainer role is not apathy. It is a powerful declaration that says, I choose to live by values, not expectations. I don't need to be understood if it costs my peace. Each time you stop explaining, you reclaim the energy once drained by pointless conversations. And when you do that often enough, you don't just get your time back, you get yourself back. 7. Memory needs no reminder. It finds its way back. Memory has a strange habit. It doesn't need to be named, retold, or spoken aloud. It only needs the right moment, a familiar scent, an old song, a seemingly harmless phrase, and suddenly it resurfaces. Vivid, sharp, even more painful than when it first happened. Because this time, there's no one to run to, no story left to blame, only you and the truth. When you leave in silence, you don't need to leave an echo. No need for a long letter. No need to announce your departure like a tragic ending. You just step out of their life firmly, clearly, without noise. And you think perhaps the memory of you will slowly fade from their mind. But what you don't see is that in the days that follow, in their quietest moments, your image begins to return. Not through action, but through contrast, through absence, through the way no one else makes them feel as safe as you once did, through the way others love them but still don't make them forget you. Stoicism teaches us this. You don't need retaliation to leave a mark. Sometimes your former presence, when placed beside the mediocrity they now settle for, is the strongest reminder of what they've lost. And that reminder doesn't come from you. It comes from them. They do the comparing. They remember. They feel that something is no longer right. They call it regret. But that regret needs no confirmation from you. It is strong enough to echo within them as a silent sentence they cannot share with anyone else. A man once said he only began missing his ex when she stopped reacting. No more jealousy, no more messages, no more seen with no reply. Her silence felt strange. At first, it annoyed him, then it left him empty. And one quiet night, when he saw a stranger who walked like her, he almost froze. Not from longing, from remorse. Because in that fleeting moment he realized no one could replace the peace she once brought. And the worst part was, he couldn't tell anyone because everyone thought he had moved on. The one who hurt you may build a new life quickly. They might appear happy, proudly posting someone new, stable, exciting, different. They'll laugh louder, share more pictures, seize every chance to say, I'm fine, I'm thriving. But that doesn't mean they've forgotten. In fact, the more they act like you never existed, the clearer it becomes that you still do living in the corner of memory they haven't dared to face. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Truth needs no defense. It appears when the noise fades." And memory is how truth returns when the noise dies down. No one forgets the person who once brought them peace within. And no one is truly at peace after losing such a person. Memory doesn't need your presence to awaken. It knows its way back. Naturally, quietly, unavoidably. Because you are no longer there to knock on their mind, but the silence you left behind is something they can never fully lock away. 8. You don't have to play the saint, just protect your peace. There's one trap kind-hearted people often fall into. They try too hard to prove they're not bitter, not hurt, not vengeful. They want to walk away gracefully, to preserve the image of the good one in the eyes of those who hurt them. They don't want to be misunderstood as cold, as heartless, as someone who cuts ties easily. They swallow their anger, hide their tears, even check in politely, not out of affection, but to avoid being labeled the bad guy. But the truth is, you don't need to play the saint just to prove your virtue. You only need the clarity to know that your peace is not a bargaining chip for someone else's pride. A woman once told me, "I don't hate him, but I never want him in my world again." That isn't hatred. It's a boundary. It's an ending without declaration, a release without justification. And I believe that within her silence, there was a strength he would never fully understand because he only measured value by reaction, by words, by others bending first. In the world of Stoicism, you're not required to become a moral symbol. You don't have to forgive instantly, open your heart unconditionally, or keep the door open for those who've hurt you. You only need to guard your peace like sacred ground, where no one enters without awareness, kindness, and emotional responsibility. True greatness isn't in sacrificing boundaries to be called good. It lies in saying enough without guilt. You can forgive without reconnecting. You can let go without ending on friendly terms. You can be silent without writing a beautiful ending to make others comfortable. Because sometimes they don't need your forgiveness, they just need you to keep playing the role of the hurt one who stays, so they can keep mistreating without feeling wrong. And when you refuse that role, you're not being cruel. You're simply taking the lead in your own story. I've seen people live in a half-forgiveness, half-endurance state. They don't love anymore, but won't leave completely for fear of being called cold. They no longer trust, but keep responding out of fear of appearing petty. They've lost faith in the relationship, but still answer messages to avoid making the other feel abandoned. And with each small act, they trade a piece of peace to maintain a noble image that no one truly values. Stoicism teaches that dignity isn't in endurance, it's in self-control. You don't have to prove you're better than anyone. You just have to stop betraying yourself. Don't sacrifice your inner calm for someone else's perception. Because the truly strong aren't those who forgive everything, but those who know what deserves forgiveness and what must be left behind for a full life. You don't need to be a saint. You don't need to act gracefully to the point of hurting yourself. You just need to protect your mental peace like the final gatekeeper of your life. And sometimes, the most sacred act is closing the door someone once stormed through in chaos. 9. Emotional discipline is the highest form of resistance. Some battles require no words, no public moves. They don't happen on the surface, but within. And the true victor is not the one who strikes back loudly, but the one who keeps silent when the mind wants to scream, the heart wants to erupt, and instinct urges an immediate response. This is not repression, it is mastery. And in the realm of emotional maturity, mastering yourself in chaos is the ultimate rebellion. No one can drag you into emotional quicksand unless you step in. They may provoke, insult, spin false stories, cast you into roles that aren't yours. But if you don't react, if you refuse to play their script, you render all their weapons useless. Manipulators need feedback to keep control. Without it, without emotion from you, they are left facing the emptiness within themselves. I once knew a woman betrayed in the very home she built with trust. For months after, the betrayer tried to provoke, blame, even slander her to family. She never spoke back, not once. Instead, she meditated, ran every morning, and rebuilt her life in purposeful silence. 6 months later, he began to falter. His stories lost weight because the only one capable of continuing the drama had walked off stage. Her silence became his undoing. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When insulted, ask yourself, does this damage my character? If not, don't let it touch your mind." We cannot control how others act, but we absolutely control how we respond. Every time you resist a reactive urge, you send a quiet but powerful message. I'm no longer ruled by the outside. I command my inner world. And to those who once thought they could sway you with emotions, that is the bitterest defeat. Emotional discipline is not numbness. It means you feel everything but nothing governs you. You still feel hurt, anger, disappointment, but you know reacting in the moment only surrenders your power. So, you pause, you breathe. You observe as an outsider, not a victim swept into their story. That choice, small as it seems, is an inner revolution. The greatest rebellion isn't screaming, "I won't take this anymore." It's the quiet act of walking away, no apology, no justification, no farewell. That's how you revoke someone's access to your peace. And when you do that, you don't just escape their game, you dismantle the entire board they built. 10. When you no longer speak, you've already won. There comes a moment in your journey toward emotional maturity when you realize you no longer want to say anything. Not because you don't know what to say, but because you no longer find it necessary. The words that once kept you awake, the conversations that once felt crucial, the longing to be heard, to be understood, to be vindicated, are now nothing more than ripples on a vast, quiet sea you've learned to swim alone. Victory doesn't come when you make someone change. It comes when you no longer need them to change for you to be at peace. It comes when you see the truth, accept it without clinging, without demanding a fair conclusion, without even needing an apology. Silence, in that moment, is no longer a reaction. It's your new nature, steady, clear, untethered. I once met a man, a corporate coach, who said the greatest achievement of his life wasn't landing a big contract, but receiving a slanderous email from a former partner and not replying. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew that silence was the strongest message. He was no longer part of the back and forth, no longer a target for someone to extract a reaction from. He had stepped back, not to avoid, but to preserve his dignity. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You can always refuse to play the tragic role by simply not taking the part." And that begins the moment you stop speaking in situations that don't deserve your voice. When you no longer speak to demand justice, to correct wrongs, to prove your point, that's when you've risen above the need to be recognized. You're no longer conditioned by how others see you, and that's a freedom no one can give you but yourself. They say you know you've truly grown when you choose peace over being understood. When you no longer need the last word to finish a conversation, but simply walk away, letting silence do its job. And strangely, that silence becomes the most profound ending because it needs no audience. no verdict, no victory. It requires only one thing, that you're ready to leave without leaving any part of yourself behind. And when you can do that, when you no longer need to speak, you've already won. Not over anyone else, but over the fragile part of you that once needed to be heard. I once thought I had to explain everything. That silence was a form of escape, that if I didn't speak up, someone would misunderstand, distort the truth, or take away what was rightfully mine. But I later realized that each time I reacted to protect my image in someone else's eyes, I allowed my inner peace to be disturbed. Truth doesn't need to be armed with arguments. It only needs to be lived with consistency, with the way I walk away, with the way I don't look back. And I've come to understand not everyone deserves your explanation. Because some people don't listen to understand. They wait for you to speak just so they can bend the story in their favor. Ever since I stopped being the explainer, I regained something I had lost for a long time, the authority over my inner life. And so can you. By choosing silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to say it. And that is where real peace begins. If you're learning how to stay silent, how to step back in serenity, how to walk away without needing a dramatic ending, then you're on the right path. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming content. Because sometimes the most important thing you'll ever say is said in silence. See you in the next video.